Now let's talk about writing a news release. So, first slide explains that the goal of this section is to teach you how to write a news release. So that's good. Why do we do a news release? Anyone? Margaret.
Well, it's skip ahead to the part where I explained it, but essentially, it's
a standard tool.
Yeah, to get the press to cover you on your own terms, and but I mean, if there's something that happens, you have an opinion on it, you want to put it out in a structured way so that someone's going to pull a quote from that's going to be exactly what you want to convey.
Yeah. So a news release is what we almost always use anytime we're trying to get any kind of media coverage. So it goes along with your news conference, even if in addition to setting up the perfect location, the perfect set of speakers, having identified your perfect hook, you also want to have the news release to go with it. That's absolutely critical. Sometimes you don't do a whole news conference because maybe it could be a question of resources. It could be a question of it's not quite that compelling. It's not so compelling that you think you could bring a lot of people out to sit and listen to you for half an hour. But it's still kind of interesting, and the press may therefore cover it. And then, frankly, mostly news conferences are about visuals, right? They're about getting TV, and so there's a lot of compelling media coverage we can generate through news releases without always doing a news conference, because it's good news, but it's not necessarily all that visual all the time. So standard tool, very important. So that's that. When would you do a news release? Anytime that there's something that happens in your campaign that meets one of the newsworthy criteria that we laid out earlier in the media section. So a bill passes, a bill is about to pass, the spill just happened, the key anniversary arrives, we have new data. You with me? What more ideas? What else might we do a news release on? The public comment deadline is tomorrow. All of these, we just delivered X million comments to EPA to stop fracking. Anyway, so anytime there's a key development, and you find an opportunity to kind of, again, meet that newsworthiness criteria, then you should do a news release. Okay, let's return to the key points of advocacy writing. So again, you want your news release, just like a letter to the editor, should flow from your strategy. It should flow from the message of your campaign. You want to be writing to a well-defined audience, and you want to connect with them. You want to follow the rules and the conventions. And then you want to make your thing compelling enough to actually get coverage. So we already know our campaign, so we won't talk about that. Let's talk about for our audience for a second. There's two ways to think about the news release. One is that, really it is the news story exactly as how we would want it to appear in the publication. So we want to write it exactly like that, and so therefore the audience of your news release is first and foremost the engaged public and the people who are going to be consuming the news that you're putting out. Secondly, though, in order for your news release to get any kind of coverage, either exactly as you wrote it or if it's going to generate a story, you need to be able to entice the news editor to be interested in it. So the news release has to put your hook and what you think is the most compelling part of your story at the very top. Even if you're trying to start with that hook and move to your main campaign message, that needs to be the focus of your news release, because otherwise it's not going to get coverage. So those are the key things about your audience to keep in mind. And then just like with the letter to the editor, it makes a difference, what publication you're targeting. If you're going to a specific geographic area, your news release is going to be very different than if you're trying to get your thing published statewide or nationwide. Okay, that's audience. Let's talk about the rules and the conventions. So we'll talk about what AP format means here in a second. But basically you want to budget about 2 or 3 hours to write and then another hour to edit and finalize. If you're just taking a news release that's been produced in our DC office and you're trying to make it, localize it for your state, it'd probably take less time, probably more like an hour. But at least that. So just because as I think we saw and we'll see in our news conference exercises, just because we have the one national report, every state is a little bit different. Every state's going to have decided the best way to localize the message, and so really spend the time to make sure you've come up with the best hook for your news release. Okay, so you decide the hook, you lay out decide your hook and the message that you want to connect to. The most important parts of the news release are the headline, the first paragraph, sometimes called the lead, and the first quote or soundbite. And these 3 things should together convey the who, what, when, where, why of your news event. And principally the kind of key hook that you're focused on. You're going to spend the most time writing this aspect of your news release. And the rest is just like kind of filler to make it seem like you look smart. I'm just kidding, that's not. But yeah, you spend at least 2/3 of your time getting this part just right. And sometimes we talk about an inverted pyramid because you're spending a bunch of time on the headline and then progressively less time as you proceed down the news release. And then in terms of the kind of rules and conventions for how you distribute the news release to reporters, at your news conference, you definitely want to have a hard copy right there at the event. So you can give it to all the reporters and they're seeing kind of your message as you're putting it out, and that can help them know kind of what questions to ask, and the television cameras can play right off of that and again, give you greater chance of getting that message out there. So you got to bring, this is not something I feel, oddly enough, that some of our allies always do, so we got to be the ones showing up with our little piece of paper, handing it out to the reporters. And then you also want to email it to them because people are, we live in a world of mostly writing things on computers these days. And you increase the chances that they're going to take the thing that you just emailed and then they'll copy and paste whole pieces of it right into their story, and that would be fantastic.
Ideal.
Indeed. Christian.
This is a minor quibble, but should we print, if we do print them out, should we print them out on like our organizational stationery?
Yes, we should. It is not a quibble, it is a fair point. Yes, so we should put it on our organizational stationery in almost all cases. And then when you email it, you just want to put it in the text of the email. You don't want to do an attachment. You don't want to overcomplicate it. This sounds like a minor quibble also, but remember that reporters have all different sorts of email systems. So what might look beautiful in your Microsoft Outlook program may look like gumbledygook to them with like a few pieces of words in it. So I always do it in whatever the text writer thing. Do it in the text writer part of your computer and email it that way. Again, not an attachment, not some big fancy thing. And then, of course, it's not enough most of the time to just send out a news release without also following up with a phone call. So your news release can be good, but usually it does not just stand on its own. Christian.
What's best practice for phone follow-up in terms of time between release and calling?
It sort of depends on, I would give it an hour or two, but no more than that usually. So there's kind of two types of releases we would do. One where it's like we've planned it out, just like we planned out a news conference. We know that we're gonna, that we don't quite have something that's newsworthy enough for a news conference, but still worth getting out there. And we've prepped our news release a couple of days before. We've called the reporters. We've tried to see if they're interested. We even sent out an advisory, just like we would for a news conference. And then we send it to them, in the morning, and we would have called them the day before and seen if they're interested, and then we send it to them in the morning. And in that case, we could pretty much just call them right away that day. The other time is when something happens, like a bill passes or a bill doesn't pass, or there's something that we didn't fully anticipate just happens, and we didn't do all that prep work necessarily to get the media primed to cover our event. And in that case, I think I'm sort of thinking about this out loud, but I would say like an hour at most you would want to wait. Okay. Other folks with experience want to weigh in, but that'd be what I'd say.
If something outside of your control happens, often I'll just pick up the phone and call the reporter too and give them a heads up that we're drafting the press release.
Good call. Yes. So sometimes it may take a little while to write your news release because good writing takes a little bit of time, but you want to make sure the reporters know that you're working on it. So give them a call in advance to make sure they know to expect something from you. Great point. Okay, any other thoughts on this? These are just the kind of the rules. And then let's go through, Shelly, I hope this is going to work. You just click on that link, maybe?
Top one?
No, the second one. So this is, we're going to go look at an Environment California news release to talk about the AP format. So key elements here, headline, new poll shows majority of Californians oppose fracking. In some cases, you might also have a subhead. Pro tip, we overdo subheads. I think mostly just do a headline, that's probably sufficient. For immediate release, has the date there. If you clicked on Dan Jacobson, you would get his contact information. In a printed version, you would actually want to write out the phone number and the email. And then the lead. So you want to state the city that the release is coming from. And you poll by the Public Policy Institute of California. Shows at 51%. You can read that. Okay. So that's basically it. The who, what, when, where is, well, what's the who?
The 51% of Californians.
Yeah, so you could say the who is the Public Policy Institute because they released the poll. And then the what would be the actual poll that shows the results. And then when? Yeah, it's not quite clear, but it seems like it's new. It must have just happened. Where? Sacramento, seems like. And then why?
Elected officials aren't taking action.
Yeah, or just like there's this controversial drilling method of extracting natural gas, and that seems like I would want to care about it. So that's pretty much it. And then we have a nice quote from Dan Jacobson. Oh, and I see, and you're moving on to that quote in which, yes, we point out the elected officials. Indeed. So that's basically that, and then if you, okay, so you basically want to get your main hook. What's the main hook here? New information. And then you have your quote. And then usually this third paragraph is some kind of, is some fact, some factual information that backs up the previous two paragraphs. And then sometimes you might, I mean, the rest of this is all just kind of, as I say, just kind of filler. I mean, it's, so you want to start with the thing that you think is the most compelling, but you also need to inform both the reporters who may not have that much information on it, or the reader who hasn't been following the news, but all of a sudden they see something that there's something out there that 51% of the people oppose, and so, oh, this is interesting. What is this fracking thing? Let me find out more about it. So then you get all this background, and then can you scroll down? Anyway, throughout here, you might put in a couple of other quotes if you have allies that you're doing the release with. And you would always make whatever point you want to make. So, for example, in this case, this is all about how, to date, California officials aren't regulating or monitoring where fracking is happening. And then you want to have a quote, if you're going to have a quote that relates right back to what you previously were just saying. Then you want to, and this is kind of cool, they have, boom, they're going to get people to sign their petition against Governor Brown. I like it. I don't know where this, at some point I learned, but I forgot. It's like font size, or we don't know what this is, but this is some.
It's like the end of some amount of time, and it's supposed to take you to either read it or write it. It's like ancient.
Yeah, it's ancient. Sometimes we replace this with hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. But that is the universal sign to reporters that your press release has ended. So that's what you do, put it at the bottom. And then you have your tagline for your group. The other thing the last thing I would note about this, about the kind of standard convention of press releases is that, again, you want to write it as if it could appear in the newspaper. So anything that's not in quotes is objective. It's facts, you're just stating the situation, you're stating it in the most compelling way that you can, but you're not making subjective statements. And your quotes is when you unleash your subjectivity. Because that's how a reporter would do it. So, for example, instead of saying a dangerous drilling, you just say controversial. Right, because there's still, it would still be considered perhaps too biased to say that fracking is dangerous, but we can all agree there's no question that it's controversial. Get that? Okay, let's look at a couple of just examples of, well, maybe one example. I thought we'd look at one example and then look at how it then appeared in the media. So this is just the headline and the first, then the lead and the first quote, obviously. Okay, what's the who? Check. What is the what? What's the why?
Because now what the laser is cool.
Well, the why is kind of like it's raising new concerns on a little examined dimension of the fracking debate. It's a good little lead in. And then is the what the report, or is the what that bonding requirements are inadequate to cover the cost? It's more of the second thing, right? So this is, I think, something. This is a standard mistake we make often in our news releases of making the report the what. But the report is not the what. The what is like what's in the report that's so interesting and new and exciting. So we have to remember to work hard to elevate that as much as we can. And then we have our excellent soundbite. Who is going to be there to pay the piper after the new gas rush is over? And then let's look at how this got lots of coverage, I noticed, on Penn Environment Research and Policy's website. Let's just look at the first.
Drill and ditch, that would have made a good one too.
This is in the Beaver County Times. I don't know where that is, but somewhere near Pittsburgh. So cute. So this, I think, I pulled this out because I think it's a great example of how the reporter found the substance, and they put that right in the beginning, right? So they didn't spend a lot of time even talking about Penn Environment Research and Policy Center, which is okay, because they still gave Erica the first quote, and then later it's mentioned. But anyway, so they just highlight the actual substance of the report that we're trying to get out, and they do it in a pretty compelling way, which is good, because they're writers, and that's what they should do. Okay. Any other thoughts on these two things? Let's see, just to kind of wrap up here with these key principles. Again, you want to, your writing should flow from your campaign. You're going to write to a well-defined audience and connect with them based on, in particular, remembering that you want the people to read, you want your news release to read exactly as it should if it were printed exactly in the paper. You want to follow the rules and the conventions of the trade. In this case, this is about distributing the release, but also about the format of the release. And then make your writing compelling enough. And again, I think in news releases in particular, we have to work hard to put the substance over the process right up front. Questions? We're doing on time, Rogers.
Right on time.
Bam.
If we're breaking for groups right now.
Yes, Tom.
Can I ask one quick question? Sorry. Just so that you're on time. Is there, similar to planning press conferences, is there a good time to release a press release? I know that in politics there's a rule that you only release stuff on Fridays if you don't want the press to cover it.
Yep.
Does the same kind of thing apply here? Are there better days than others?
Yeah, I mean, I think the same rules apply as news conferences for anything we could plan ahead. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are great. I will say that, you know, if you think you have a good enough story, you could do something on Friday.
Right.
Especially, we did this summer, and I was actually, you know, remembering my training, advocating against it. I was like, we can't have a news conference on a Friday. But it was right before the Memorial Day weekend, and the whole point of the news conference was about how Jordan Lake was going to get all these visitors over Memorial Day weekend, and the legislature just voted to pollute it more.
Yeah.
And so it was perfect because they basically, all the newspaper reporters were still working on Friday, and then they had something to run all weekend.
Right.
So anyway, so there are exceptions, but for the most part, if you're planning it out, I think the same rules apply. And then if you're not planning it, then just get it out as soon as you can.